It was a crisp, quiet morning when Jason Parker woke up, just like every other Saturday for the past 5 years. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden hue through the blinds of his bedroom window. He stretched, groaned softly, and reached over to the nightstand to silence his phone. A typical routine, quiet mornings before the whirlwind of work, family life, and all the unspoken expectations that come with them. His wife, Maria, was still asleep beside him, her steady breathing a comfort he'd grown used to over the years. The house, nestled on the outskirts of the city, stood as a symbol of stability. Jason was a local accountant, respected by his colleagues and clients alike, yet when he wasn't in the office, he liked nothing more than to retreat to his small haven of peace. Maria, an elementary school teacher, was no different. They had always lived a simple life, no drama, no scandals, just a predictable existence built on love, trust, and the quiet undercurrent of their suburban routine. At least, that's what Jason thought. His heart swelled with contentment, thinking about the plans they had for the day, a family breakfast at their favorite diner followed by a trip to the park with their young daughter, Zoe. It was supposed to be another ordinary Saturday. As the sunlight crept higher, Jason slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Maria. He moved toward the kitchen, his mind still half absorbed in the thoughts of the day ahead. He switched on the kettle, the sound of boiling water filling the silence of the house. He reached for his phone, scanning through emails, only half reading them, distracted by the peacefulness of the moment. But something caught his eye, a message notification from a number he didn't recognize. Curious, he swiped the message open. The message was short, cryptic, and disturbing. "I saw Maria last night. You don't know the half of it." His stomach tightened as the words seemed to sink into his bones. He stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. His mind raced with questions. Who was this person? What did they mean by the half of it? What could Maria possibly be involved in that Jason didn't know about? His heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from the gnawing sense of betrayal that started to take root in his chest. His eyes darted toward the bedroom, where Maria lay, still unaware of the storm was about to hit their home. Jason shook his head, trying to clear the sudden flood of confusion. It had to be a mistake. Maybe a prank, or worse, a misunderstanding. But as the minutes dragged on, his doubt gave way to something darker. What if it wasn't? What if this was the beginning of something he couldn't control, something that would change everything? He couldn't just let it go. His hands trembled as he typed a reply, his fingers hesitant on the keys. Who is this? What are you talking about? He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then stared at the phone as if the answer might appear before his eyes. The silence that followed was suffocating, the hum of the kettle the only sound as he waited. Minutes passed, but no reply came. Jason tried to ignore the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. He went about making his coffee, trying to push the thought from his mind. The warm cup felt comforting in his hands, but the disquiet in his stomach remained. The message echoed in his head. He had to know more. Was it real? Could his wife be hiding something? The thought of Maria, the woman he trusted more than anyone, being involved in something shady, was almost too much to bear. But he couldn't shake it off. Something wasn't right. He paced back and forth in the kitchen, mind racing, when his phone buzzed again. The message notification from the unknown number made his heart skip a beat. He grabbed the phone, his breath catching as he read the next message. "You're not the first to be fooled by her. Just thought you should know." Jason's hands went clammy as a cold wave of realization washed over him. The cryptic words felt like an accusation. But what could they mean? Who was the sender, and why would they say this? The doubt was spreading like wildfire now, consuming him. He knew he couldn't just sit around and wonder. His whole body felt like it was on edge. His mind flickered through the images of his marriage, the long talks at night, the intimate moments they shared, the promises of forever. Maria had always been there for him, always seemed to know exactly what he needed. But was it possible that she had been hiding something all along? The idea of betrayal seemed too far-fetched to even entertain, yet here it was, right in front of him. Jason took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He needed answers. If the messages were true, if there was even a grain of truth to what was being suggested, then he had to know. He couldn't go on living in ignorance, not when the very foundation of his life seemed to be crumbling. His mind raced as he thought about his next move. He couldn't confront Maria without knowing for sure. But how could he find out the truth? He couldn't risk confronting her without any evidence, that would only make things worse. A small, logical voice inside his head told him to calm down, to wait for more information, but it was drowned out by the urgency to act. He decided to take a step that would forever change the course of his life. He would begin looking into it. He would investigate, not just the messages, but Maria's life. Her day-to-day activities. The people she interacted with. The small, insignificant details he'd overlooked for years. Jason wasn't one to snoop, but what choice did he have now? As he brewed his coffee, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Maria stirring in the bedroom. Jason quickly wiped the cold sweat from his palms, trying to steady himself. Maria walked into the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep, a sleepy smile on her face as she greeted him. "Morning, babe," she said, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. Jason forced a smile in return, feeling the weight of the secret he was carrying. "Morning," he replied, his voice a little too tight. Maria seemed oblivious to the storm brewing within him. She went to the counter, preparing her own cup of coffee. Jason watched her every move, every glance, every word she spoke. Was it possible? Could she really be hiding something? "Anything interesting happen while I was sleeping?" Maria asked, clearly not noticing the tension in Jason's expression. Jason hesitated, his mind racing as he tried to keep his composure. He wanted to say something, to ask her about the messages, to demand an explanation. But the fear of what he might discover held him back. Instead, he shook his head. "No, not really. Just the usual." Maria smiled and took a sip of her coffee. Jason watched her, but his mind was elsewhere. The unknown message, the cryptic words, haunted him like a shadow. This was no longer just another quiet Saturday. It had become a day that would change everything. Jason couldn't go back to the life he'd known before, no matter how much he wanted to. The storm had begun, and there was no turning back now. As they sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them stretched longer than usual. Jason's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, but he said nothing. Maria didn't notice. She had no idea what was about to happen. And neither did Jason. But he would find out soon enough. Jason sat quietly at the kitchen table, his mind racing with a million thoughts, but none of them were focused on the peaceful moment unfolding in front of him. Maria had no idea the storm he was silently preparing for, a storm that was rapidly taking shape in the back of his mind. As she sipped her coffee and hummed to herself, Jason couldn't help but wonder if everything he had ever known was about to shatter. The day began to unfold in the same predictable way it always did. Maria went about her routine, preparing breakfast, talking about her plans for the day, and mentioning the books her students were reading. Jason nodded along, offering the occasional response, but his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle that had suddenly appeared before him. He couldn't let go of the mysterious messages, the cryptic hints about his wife's secret life. How long had it been going on? Had she been hiding this from him for years? Or was this something new, something recent? Every small detail of their life together now seemed to have a hidden meaning, something he'd overlooked. The way she always seemed to leave her phone unlocked when she wasn't around, the late nights when she claimed to be grading papers but came home smelling like perfume he didn't recognize, Were these just coincidences, or were they signs of something darker? Jason had never been one to entertain paranoia, but the doubt growing inside him was undeniable. He needed answers. He had to get to the bottom of this. As they finished breakfast, Maria mentioned that she had a faculty meeting to attend later in the afternoon. It wasn't unusual for her to have meetings, and Jason had always supported her career, understanding the demands of being a teacher. But today, it felt different. The thought of Maria being out of the house, free from his watchful eye, made him uneasy. He wanted to follow her, watch her every move, but he knew he couldn't. That would be crossing a line, one he wasn't sure he could come back from. Instead, he decided to take a more subtle approach. As Maria gathered her things to leave, Jason kissed her goodbye, masking his turmoil with a smile. "I'll be here when you get back," he said, his voice a little too strained. She smiled back, not noticing the tension in his expression. Once the door closed behind her, Jason felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. The quiet of the house was now deafening. He walked to the living room, pacing back and forth as he tried to decide what to do next. He knew he needed to find something, anything, to either confirm his worst fears or put his mind at ease. His phone buzzed again, the unknown number's message flashing on the screen. "You're wasting time, Jason. The truth is out there. You just have to look for it." His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. The sender knew his name. It wasn't a random message anymore. Whoever was behind this had been watching, had been waiting for this moment. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Maria. This was bigger. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he couldn't stop now. The floodgates had opened, and there was no turning back. Jason couldn't ignore the message. It felt like a call to action, urging him to dig deeper, to uncover whatever secret Maria had been hiding. The words lingered in his mind as he moved to the kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened his laptop. The thought of going through Maria's personal things felt like an invasion of privacy, but what choice did he have? This was no longer about trust, it was about survival. He needed answers, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get them. He opened the web browser and typed in Maria's name, hoping to find some clue that would lead him down the right path. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. The clock was ticking. Maria would be home soon, and he needed to know the truth before she returned. As he scrolled through search results, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were links to her school's website, her social media profiles, and a few articles she had written about teaching. But there was nothing that raised any red flags. Frustrated, Jason leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. Maybe the message was just a prank. Maybe he was overthinking everything. He had always been a logical person, someone who trusted reason above all else. But now, his mind was clouded with doubt, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then, he remembered the one thing he hadn't considered yet, her phone. Maria's phone was usually left charging on the kitchen counter when she was at work, a routine she'd never broken. Jason had never gone through her phone before, it felt like a betrayal. But now, it felt like the only way to get the answers he desperately needed. With a deep breath, he stood up and walked over to the counter. The phone sat there, face up, as if waiting for him to make his move. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. His hands trembled as he unlocked it, his heart pounding in his chest. The screen lit up, revealing Maria's messages and notifications. Jason's eyes scanned through the texts, his mind racing as he looked for something, anything, that would explain the mysterious messages. There were the usual messages from friends, colleagues, and family, nothing unusual. But then, as he scrolled further, he found something that made his blood run cold. There, at the bottom of the screen, was a message from an unknown number. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he read the message aloud to himself. I can't keep doing this. We need to stop before Jason finds out. His heart pounded in his chest as he read the words again, the reality of what he was seeing settling over him like a heavy weight. The message was from a man, someone Maria had been in contact with. Jason had no idea who he was, but the words were clear. There was something going on between them, something that had been kept hidden from him for who knows how long. The more Jason looked, the more his mind raced. He quickly scrolled through the rest of the conversation, piecing together the fragments of messages that seemed to confirm his worst fears. There were plans to meet up, secret rendezvous, and cryptic comments that only confirmed the affair. Jason's hands shook as he read the final message in the thread. We'll figure it out, but not today. Jason is too smart for us. The words hit him like a punch in the gut. Maria had been lying to him. She had been seeing someone else, someone she was clearly afraid of him finding out about. The weight of the betrayal crashed down on him, and for the first time, he felt like his entire world was spinning out of control. His marriage, the foundation of his life, was a lie. Every memory, every moment he had shared with Maria now felt tainted, like a facade that had been carefully constructed to hide the truth. Jason's mind whirled as he tried to process what he had just uncovered. He felt a wave of anger wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of hurt. How could Maria do this to him? How could she betray everything they had built together? The emotions were overwhelming, and Jason found himself on the verge of tears, but he refused to let himself break down. Not yet. He had to think clearly. His phone buzzed again, bringing him out of his thoughts. It was another message from the unknown number. The message was short, but it carried an unsettling tone. Don't confront her yet. There's more you need to know. The words sent a chill down Jason's spine. What more was there to uncover? How deep did this go? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. He had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and now, he was trapped in a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that would shake the very core of his existence. The truth was out there, and Jason was determined to find it, no matter the cost. Jason's mind felt like it was spiraling. Everything he had known about his life, his marriage, his relationship with Maria, was now called into question. The betrayal hit him like a freight train, and his heart, once full of trust and love, now ached with a raw, uncontrollable pain. The messages he had uncovered from Maria's phone were damning, confirming everything he had feared but never dared to believe. She had been seeing someone else behind his back for who knows how long. And the worst part? She was scared of him finding out, as if their life together was some kind of game to her, and he was just another player in her secret world. Jason couldn't sit still. He paced around the living room, trying to make sense of it all, but the pieces of the puzzle wouldn't fit. What had changed between them? What had gone wrong? They had built a life together, shared dreams, faced challenges, and yet here he was, staring down the realization that everything had been a lie. He could feel his pulse quicken, his chest tighten as anger and hurt coiled together in a storm inside of him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He needed answers, and Maria was the only one who could provide them. But he wasn't sure he was ready to confront her. After all, what could he possibly say? I know about the affair. How could he even begin to phrase such a thing without losing everything? But then, there was the other message, the one from the unknown number that had warned him, don't confront her yet. There's more you need to know. More? What more could there be? Jason was already reeling from the truth he had uncovered. How much deeper could this rabbit hole go? The thought of Maria coming home, her bright smile hiding the dark secret she had been keeping from him, sent a wave of nausea through him. He could hear the front door open in the distance, the sound of keys being dropped in the hallway. Jason's breath caught in his throat. There was no turning back now. He couldn't just act like everything was fine anymore, couldn't pretend like he hadn't just uncovered the most shattering truth of his life. The game was over. Maria walked into the living room, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Hey, you're still here," she said, her voice too cheerful, too unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. Jason stood frozen, his thoughts racing. How could she be so normal, so casual, when he had just discovered the truth? The rage that had been building inside him was starting to bubble over. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out. Instead, he stood there, locked in place, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Maria, still oblivious, set her bag down and went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Jason's mind was screaming at him to act, to confront her, to demand the truth. But a part of him held back. The uncertainty was eating at him. What if he was wrong? What if this was all just a misunderstanding? But deep down, Jason knew he wasn't wrong. The evidence was clear. He wasn't imagining things. His world had just been shattered, and now he had to figure out what to do with it. "Jason? You okay?" Maria's voice broke through his thoughts, and Jason looked up to see her standing in the doorway, concern on her face. His chest tightened. This was it. The moment of truth. But how did he begin? How did he start this conversation that would change everything? He couldn't just ask her if she was having an affair. No, he had to be smarter than that. He had to know exactly what he was dealing with before he made any rash moves. He couldn't let his emotions control him, not yet. "I'm fine," he finally said, his voice sounding hollow in his own ears. He turned away from her, his mind still swirling with 1,000 different thoughts. He had to buy time. He couldn't confront her yet, not without more answers. Maria didn't seem to notice his tone, brushing it off as nothing more than the result of his long day. She walked over to him, wrapping her arms around him in a hug. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about how lucky we are," she said softly, her breath warm against his neck. "We have everything we need, Jason. We're so fortunate." Jason's heart twisted painfully in his chest as she spoke. If she only knew how much he was struggling with the very idea of their life together. But he didn't let it show. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her, pretending to hold on, pretending that nothing had changed. He could feel the lies in the air between them, thick and suffocating. He had never felt more disconnected from her than he did in that moment. After a long, uncomfortable silence, Maria pulled away and smiled at him. "So, what's on your mind?" she asked, clearly trying to break the tension. "You've been quiet all evening." Jason couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. Not yet. Instead, he forced a smile and shrugged. "Just thinking," he muttered, unable to meet her eyes. "You know, about everything. About us." Maria's smile faded slightly as she studied him, her brow furrowing in confusion. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed. "Well, you know I'm always here if you want to talk, right?" Jason nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he knew and what he still didn't know. He couldn't talk to her, not yet. He needed time. Time to understand what was really going on. Time to figure out his next move. The hours dragged on in silence. Maria spent the evening reading a book in the living room, and Jason sat with her, trying to keep up the facade of normalcy. The more he sat there, the more the knot in his stomach twisted, the more the weight of the situation became unbearable. Finally, when the evening came to a close, and they both headed to bed, Jason felt a sense of dread settle over him. Sleep was impossible. How could he sleep knowing what he knew? The truth was gnawing at him from the inside out. Every minute that passed felt like a betrayal, a slow burn of everything he thought was real. As Maria lay beside him, drifting off to sleep, Jason stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a blur of anger, confusion, and pain. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't go on living a lie, pretending that everything was fine. He needed to know more. The truth was still out there, waiting for him to find it, and Jason was determined to uncover it, no matter what it took. His mind raced, and with every passing second, he knew that the confrontation with Maria was inevitable. But when the time came, would he be ready for the fallout? Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would find the answers he needed. Tomorrow, he would confront the truth. But for now, as the night dragged on, Jason lay awake, consumed by the chaos inside him, waiting for the storm to break. The morning arrived, but it felt like no new day at all. The sky outside was still and gray, mirroring the heaviness that had settled in Jason's chest. As the sun barely peeked through the clouds, he sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his coffee cup, his mind reeling from the events of the past 24 hours. The messages, the betrayal, the sharp, guttural realization that Maria had been leading a double life, all of it weighed heavily on him. How had he missed the signs? How had he allowed himself to believe in a lie for so long? Maria, seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside him, hummed quietly in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. The soft clinking of pots and pans only served to deepen the chasm between them. Every movement she made felt like a betrayal, a sharp reminder of the trust he'd once given her. Jason's hand gripped the edge of his coffee cup tighter, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to confront her, wanted to scream at her, demand the truth, but the words stuck in his throat. She turned around, her bright smile a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked casually, her tone light and carefree, as if there was nothing wrong. Jason's heart ached at the contrast between her demeanor and the weight of the truth he carried. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to tell her everything, to unload the burden that had been gnawing at him. But another part of him feared what would happen if he did. Would she deny it? Would she lie to his face, pretending nothing had changed? Or would the truth break her, shatter the image of their life together in ways he couldn't predict? "I'm just trying to figure things out," he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. He didn't look up at her. He couldn't. Not yet. Maria's expression softened, her eyes filled with concern. She walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know things have been tense lately," she said, her voice full of softness. "But we'll work through it. You and me, we always do." Jason flinched, unable to contain the rush of emotions that surged within him. "Work through it," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you expect to work through this, Maria? How do we work through a lie?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and as soon as they left his mouth, he regretted them. But there was no taking them back. His eyes met hers, his gaze intense and searching, as if looking for any sign of guilt, any flicker of honesty. Maria froze, her smile faltering. For a brief moment, Jason saw a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, perhaps, or guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She quickly withdrew her hand from his shoulder, taking a step back. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice now tinged with defensiveness. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, and the urge to confront her fully, to throw everything on the table and watch her squirm under the weight of her own lies, was almost overwhelming. But he fought the impulse, forcing himself to stay calm, to keep the conversation controlled. This wasn't just about venting his anger, it was about finding the truth. He leaned back in his chair, trying to steady himself. "I know about the affair," he said flatly, his voice cold and firm. "I know you've been seeing someone else." Maria's face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing, and Jason felt the tension in the room thickening. Her eyes darted nervously to the floor, then to the window, and then back at him, as if searching for a way out of the conversation. But there was no escape. "Not now." "Jason," she finally said, her voice shaking slightly, I don't know what you're talking about. Jason stared at her, his expression hardening. Don't lie to me, Maria. I saw the messages. I saw everything. His voice cracked slightly as the pain of the revelation surged through him again. He had read the words with his own eyes, seen the flirtations, the promises, the lies. How could she? She stood there, silent for what seemed like an eternity, her eyes filled with shame but also with something else, something that Jason couldn't quite place. Then, finally, she spoke again, but her words didn't offer the relief Jason had hoped for. I'm sorry, Jason, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The apology felt empty, hollow, as if she were simply repeating words she thought he wanted to hear. But he wasn't interested in apologies. He needed the truth. He needed to understand why. Why had she done this to him? Why had she destroyed everything they had built? I don't want your apology, he snapped, his voice shaking now with frustration. I want to know why, Maria. Why did you do this to me? What happened to us? She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jason could feel the seconds stretching into minutes, each one pulling him deeper into a well of confusion and hurt. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his life, was standing in front of him, unable to explain herself. It was as if their entire marriage had been a lie. I didn't mean to fall for him, she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. It just happened. And I didn't know how to stop it. Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could she say that? It just happened. Was that supposed to be an explanation? A justification? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. So what now? He asked, his voice thick with bitterness. What happens now, Maria? Do we just pretend everything is fine? Do I just forget that you've been lying to me for God knows how long? Maria shook her head, tears beginning to well in her eyes. No, Jason. I know I've hurt you. I know I've betrayed you. But I don't want to lose you. I want to fix this. I'm willing to do anything. Anything to make it right. Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't about fixing things, not yet. This wasn't about making it right. This was about finding the truth, about understanding what had led them to this point. He had to know everything. He had to know why. You want to fix this? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Then tell me everything. Tell me who he is. Tell me how long this has been going on. Don't lie to me anymore, Maria. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I don't know how to make this right. Jason's heart ached, the weight of everything pressing down on him. But he didn't let the pain show. He couldn't. Not yet. Tell me, he demanded again. And then we'll figure out what happens next. Maria nodded slowly, the tears flowing freely now. His name is Aaron, she said softly. We met at work. It started out as just casual flirting, but it became more than that. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to stop. Jason sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as he processed the information. Aaron. He had no idea who Aaron was, but he would find out. He would find out everything. The storm was only just beginning. Jason could feel his heart beating wildly in his chest, each thud a painful reminder of the reality that had been slowly but surely unraveling around him. The words Maria had just spoken, his name is Aaron, kept echoing in his mind like a broken record. Aaron. He didn't know who this man was, but it was clear that Aaron had become a fixture in Maria's life in a way Jason had never anticipated. For a long time, Jason had prided himself on his ability to trust people, to build strong relationships. Now, it felt as if the foundation of his entire life had been cracked open. He was grasping for control, for answers, but the more he tried to piece things together, the more elusive the truth seemed to become. Maria's tears continued to fall, her body trembling as she tried to reach out to him, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But Jason couldn't bring himself to embrace her, not yet. Not with the weight of her betrayal still hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. Instead, he stood up, pacing the room as his mind spiraled further into chaos. "I don't get it," he muttered, mostly to himself. "How could you do this? After everything we've been through? I trusted you." Maria's voice wavered as she spoke, her words soft and full of regret. "I know, Jason. I know I've broken your trust, and I'm sorry. But I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." But her words felt hollow. Sorry wasn't enough. It never would be. Jason stopped pacing and turned to face her, his gaze sharp and piercing. "You say you never wanted to hurt me, but that's exactly what you've done. Do you realize what this has done to me? To us?" His voice was thick with emotion, and he struggled to keep the rising anger in check. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him, it was the realization that Maria had hidden it so well, that she had been lying to him day in and day out. All the while, he had been loving her, trusting her with his heart, believing that they had something real. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the lies, the secrecy, the years of doubt that would now follow. Maria took a shaky step forward, her hands outstretched. "Please, Jason. I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly." Jason couldn't hold back the sarcasm that slipped into his voice. "A mistake? You think this was just some small, innocent mistake? You think having an affair with someone else is just a simple slip-up?" He shook his head, his disbelief growing. "How many other things have you lied about, Maria? How many other secrets have you been hiding?" Her eyes darted to the ground, unable to meet his gaze. "There's nothing else," she whispered, though there was a hesitation in her voice. Jason didn't buy it. There was more, he was sure of it. There was always more. "Then tell me the truth," he demanded, stepping closer to her. His voice was firm, but the hurt in it was undeniable. "How long has this been going on, Maria? How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" Maria's shoulders sagged, her tears falling freely now, but she didn't answer immediately. It was as if she were trying to find the right words, trying to craft a story that would somehow make sense of everything. But there were no right words, no way to fix what had been broken. All she had was the truth, and whether or not she was ready to share it, that was the only thing that could make any difference now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maria spoke again. "We've been seeing each other for over a year," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to walk away." Jason's stomach twisted in knots. Over a year. The thought of it, of Maria being with someone else for that long while pretending everything was fine between them, was almost too much to bear. His mind reeled with the implications of her words. What had she felt for him during that time? What had she been thinking when they shared their quiet moments together, when they laughed and loved? Had it all been a lie? He had no answers, only more questions, and they gnawed at him relentlessly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Why didn't you just leave me if you were so unhappy?" he asked, his voice cracked with emotion. "Why did you stay? Why did you keep lying?" Maria shook her head, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to believe that it wasn't as simple as that. "I didn't want to leave you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I didn't know how to explain everything. Jason turned away from her, staring out the window as he tried to steady his breath. His mind was a whirlwind, his thoughts scattered and fragmented, unable to make sense of anything. He had never felt so betrayed, so lost. The woman he had built his life with, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had been living a secret life all along. What did that say about their relationship? What did it say about him? "I don't know if I can forgive you," Jason said quietly, the words tasting bitter as they left his lips. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Maria stepped forward, her hands reaching out for him, but Jason instinctively pulled away. He couldn't bear to have her touch him right now. He needed space. He needed time. His heart was shattered, and though part of him wanted to believe that they could work through this, that somehow they could rebuild the trust that had been destroyed, another part of him knew that it might never be the same again. The damage had already been done. As Maria stood there, her face etched with sorrow, Jason felt a deep, aching sense of loss. It wasn't just the loss of her love, but the loss of the life they had built together. Everything had changed in an instant. The world that once felt solid and dependable now seemed fragile, full of cracks and fractures that threatened to break it all apart. "I need some time," Jason said, his voice low and filled with exhaustion. "I need to think. I need to figure out what I want. I can't do this right now." Maria's shoulders slumped further, and she nodded, her voice barely audible. "I understand. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry." But no amount of apologies could undo the damage that had been done. No amount of regret could take away the pain. As Jason stood there, watching the woman he had once called his partner crumble before him, he realized that there was no easy way out of this. No quick fix. The road ahead was uncertain, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure where it would lead. The betrayal had shattered his perception of their life together, and no matter how much he wanted to hold on to the past, he knew that things would never be the same again. The community, their friends, their families, they would all be affected by this. What would they think? How would they react? Jason wasn't sure he was ready for that either. He wasn't ready to face the fallout, to deal with the questions and the whispers. But one thing was clear, the path forward was not going to be easy, and Jason was going to have to make choices, hard choices, that would determine the future of his life. The following days felt like a blur for Jason. He moved through them like a man who had been stripped of everything he thought he knew. Each morning, he woke up with a deep, aching emptiness in his chest, and each night, he tried to find a way to sleep through the tumult of thoughts racing in his mind. His relationship with Maria, the woman he had once trusted with every part of his life, now seemed like a fragile illusion. The lies, the secrecy, and the deep, unspoken betrayal hung over him like a dark cloud, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everything around him was crumbling. Maria had given him space, just as he had asked for, but her presence was still a constant weight on his shoulders. He could feel her eyes following him whenever they crossed paths, her guilt hanging in the air like a silent accusation. Jason had tried to push those feelings aside, tried to focus on work, tried to pretend that things could go back to normal if he just pretended everything was fine. But the truth was undeniable. Nothing would ever be the same again. The worst part was the feeling of being lost. He had spent years building a life with Maria, with the belief that they had something real, something unbreakable. And yet, in a matter of days, that foundation had been shattered. Jason found himself questioning everything, their entire relationship, his own ability to trust, even his judgment of people. How had he been so blind to what was happening behind his back? How had he missed the signs, the subtle clues that something was wrong? The self-doubt that plagued him was paralyzing. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the realization that Maria had never truly believed in their relationship as he had. For her, it had been something to be maintained, something to be hidden away, kept under wraps while she sought something else. And that, something else, had been Aaron. Jason didn't know who this man was, but his very existence made Jason feel small, insignificant, and unworthy. Still, amidst the confusion and heartbreak, Jason knew that he couldn't just let this moment define him. He had to find a way to move forward, to figure out how to reclaim his life, even if it meant walking away from the woman he had once thought was his soulmate. The thought of it terrified him, but it was also the only way he could see to preserve what little dignity he had left. It wasn't long before Jason found himself sitting in front of a lawyer, his mind spinning with questions about what he was supposed to do next. Divorce? Separation? Could they ever fix this? The lawyer spoke about the legalities with a professional detachment, but Jason couldn't bring himself to fully listen. His mind kept going back to Maria, to the look in her eyes when she confessed everything, to the way she had tried to explain herself, but ultimately failed to make it all right. "Do you think you can reconcile?" the lawyer asked, breaking through his haze of thoughts. Jason's eyes burned as he forced himself to focus. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Part of me wants to, but the other part of me," he swallowed hard, choking back the lump that had formed in his throat. "I don't know if I can trust her again." The lawyer nodded sympathetically, understanding the depth of Jason's dilemma. Trust is the hardest thing to rebuild once it's been broken. It's not something you can fix overnight, and in some cases, it may never be the same. Jason was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened, about what his next steps should be. "I don't know what I want anymore," he admitted. "I don't know who I am without her." The lawyer looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Sometimes, it takes a moment like this to rediscover who you are. It's not about what you've lost, but about what you're going to find moving forward." It was a sentiment that stuck with Jason, though he didn't fully understand it yet. How could he find himself again when he was so broken? How could he rebuild his life from the ashes of a relationship that had once meant everything to him? But the more he thought about it, the more Jason realized that the most important thing wasn't the past, it was the future. He had to focus on what he could control, on what he could do to heal. And though he had no clear answers, there was a glimmer of hope that perhaps, one day, he would find peace again. In the following weeks, Jason began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but he took small steps forward, trying to reclaim the parts of himself that had been buried beneath the weight of his heartbreak. He started spending more time with friends, people who reminded him of who he used to be before all of this. He went to the gym, tried to focus on his career, and sought out therapy to work through the emotional turmoil that had consumed him. Maria, for her part, continued to reach out. She called him, sent messages, tried to explain herself in ways that made him feel guilty for even considering walking away. She apologized over and over, but Jason couldn't help but wonder if she was only apologizing because she was afraid of losing him for good. She had already lost his trust, and now she was desperate to keep him from walking out the door. But no matter how many times she said the words, no matter how much she begged, Jason knew that the damage had already been done. There were days when he thought about her, when he longed for the life they had shared before everything fell apart. He missed their quiet evenings, their inside jokes, the way she would smile when they shared a moment of peace. But with each passing day, the sting of betrayal dulled, and the clarity of the situation began to set in. He wasn't the same man anymore, and neither was Maria. She had changed. He had changed. It was during one of his therapy sessions that Jason began to understand the full extent of his transformation. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but he was learning to let go. He was learning that it wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about finding a way to let go of the past so that he could move forward. It wasn't easy, but he knew he had to try. Eventually, Jason made the difficult decision to end things with Maria. It wasn't because he didn't care for her anymore, it was because he knew that for both of them to heal, they needed to move in separate directions. They could no longer live in the shadow of their past. It was time to close that chapter, even if it meant facing the unknown. The fallout from his decision was as painful as he had anticipated. Their families, their friends, the people who had known them as a couple, everyone had their own opinions, their own judgments about what Jason had done. There were whispers, accusations, and judgments, but Jason stood firm. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could control how he moved forward. In the months that followed, Jason began to rebuild his life in ways he hadn't thought possible. He took trips to places he had always wanted to visit, met new people, and found a sense of independence he had never known before. The road wasn't easy, and there were times when he thought he might never feel whole again, but each day brought a new lesson, a new opportunity to grow. And then, one day, Maria reached out to him, just as she had so many times before. But this time, Jason wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't filled with the same sense of loss that had consumed him in the past. He was calm, centered, and, strangely, at peace. He had made his decision, and he was no longer trapped in the weight of their past. "I think we both deserve to find happiness," Jason said quietly over the phone, his voice steady and sure. "But it's not going to be together." Maria didn't argue. She didn't try to change his mind. Instead, there was silence on the other end of the line, a quiet acceptance of what had transpired between them. As Jason hung up the phone, he looked out the window, watching the sun begin to set. For the first time in a long while, he felt the faintest stirrings of hope. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held, but he had taken control of his own life again. And that, in itself, was enough. In the end, Jason learned that life wasn't always about finding the answers, it was about learning to live with the questions, to keep moving forward even when the past threatened to hold him back. And as he walked down that uncertain path, he knew that, no matter what happened next, he was finally free.